I am Mandy Hawker. It is great to be with you. I'm the Elementary ELA Standards Education Associate from the Office of Assessment and Standards. And basically that means that I support the implementation of the ELA standards for grade K through 5. With me this morning, I have two co-pilots. I have Brenna McCormick, who is our middle level ELA Standards Ed Associate, and I have Casey Prince Harvey, who is our Humanities and ELA Secondary Education Associate for Standards. Casey's kind of supporting that secondary lens, but also supports all of our humanities as they enter their standard cycles. They will both be in the chat answering any questions and dropping links for you as we go through our presentation this morning. Now that we've introduced ourselves, we would love for you to introduce yourselves in the chat. So if you will, drop who you are and where you are this morning. We just want to know who we have in attendance. So if you will drop your name and your location, that can be where you are coming to us from or the county or district that you represent. So always good to see some familiar faces. I love seeing my friends that come often, and then I love seeing some people who are brand new. So welcome. We're glad to have you today. As we are getting started, I will get Casey to drop in our landing page. Our landing page is a note catcher today because a lot of our work will require some deep diving into hyperlinks and articles and resources, but there's also going to be places for you to record your thinking so that you have that to refer back to after our webinar concludes. So that note catcher landing page is dropped into the chat. Casey's also going to pin it in the chat so it lives right at the top of the page, so you can always find that. Then I will go ahead and warn you that we will have some breakout rooms today. There will be a couple of opportunities during this session to collaborate in some breakout rooms. These will be a time for you to work with partners to accomplish a couple of different tasks. You may reflect on the learning that's going on. And we'd also love for you as the experts across the state in ELA to share your findings and your resources. If you are in the session during our breakout room time, please be sure to engage in the work that's taking place. But we also know that you are juggling many tasks and connectivity can sometimes be an issue. But we hope that you will utilize the features of the breakout room. And then finally, like we always say, today we will present some instructional ideas and suggestions, but all of that is to be used in support of your high quality instructional materials. And so those would be those curriculums or textbooks that you have adopted locally for your district. All right. Now, we also want to acknowledge that recertification credit is offered today for those of you who are attending live. If you're watching the recording, unfortunately, at this time, we're not able to offer that recertification credit. But if you would like recertification credit and you're watching live with us today, there are 3 requirements. First, you must attend the webinar and be an active participant. Next, you must remain in attendance for the duration of this webinar. And then third, complete the feedback form at the end of the webinar using your correct email so that we can send those recertification forms back out to you. We have had a little trouble in the past with some misspellings on some of the email addresses submitted. So ensure that you're putting in the right email address because we want to make sure you get those certificates. All right, now let's take a look at today's purpose. As you can see, it's full of educator lingo. I'm going to give you just 1 minute to read it. All right, again, it's full of educator lingo. But as you take a look at the verbs of what you're able to do and nouns of the context of what you're doing it in your own words, I want you to put in the chat, what do you think you should be able to do when we're finished today? So respond back to me in the chat. What do you think you should be able to do when we are finished today? This also corresponds to box 1 on your note catcher. If you'd like to go ahead and record your thinking there as well. Yes, my friend Angie. That's exactly right. Basically, we're just going to share some instructional strategies for oral communications and understand those oral communications expectations, particularly the rigor of how that increases from kindergarten through fifth grade. Yes, we want to enhance our oral communication and understand that those three standards have very different expectations and how they can be implemented with the new curriculum. Jennifer, I'm so glad you mentioned that because we will be diving into some of the high quality instructional materials that are adopted across our state. And Letitia, I love that you said thoroughly understand. Yes, we hope that we are explicit enough in our explanation around these indicators and then through your work with these indicators that you feel confident about how to enter the instruction around oral communications and how to better support the oral communications instruction already taking place in the buildings where you serve. All right, now let's calibrate a little bit with a quote. Now, this is a quote many of you, I bet, have read before because this quote comes from the ELA Standards document and page 20. So if you've read the ELA Standards document, you probably see this and you think, oh, I've read this before. It sounds familiar. You're absolutely right. Go ahead and read that quote. I'll give you a minute to do that. Now, think about that quote through your elementary school lens. You have a special lens that you enter these standards with. So, consider for me, what does this mean for reading and writing in our ELA classrooms? But how can this also shape the way you approach the instruction of oral communications in your classroom, particularly that elementary classroom? Yes, Jessica, we don't have quiet classrooms in ELA, do we? Thank goodness. Oh, Tracy, yes, because it says numerous opportunities at each grade level. So does that mean that one part of the day you allow for that oral communication? No, and Jenna, I'm so glad you said story shares because today is National Read Aloud Day. Isn't that a perfect place to do that oral communication work? Yes, yes. Now, April, when we talk about discussions and presenting, oftentimes I feel like presenting is the part that's left off from oral communications. So I'm so glad you mentioned that in the chat. And Angie, it can be as simple as when students read or hear a story, they're sharing what they're wondering or thinking. That's a great entry point and an access point for all students with oral communications. Now that we've kind of adjusted our lens and really focused on how this information is going to impact us, I'd like for us to dig into the meat of our agenda today. So we have 4 parts that we'll be exploring. First is that general overview of oral communications. Then next we'll be exploring the expectations with those indicators and standards. Then we'll move into some instructional practices and collaboration. And then finally follow up with some clarity and closure. And Ben Dusick, I'm so glad that we have you here with us this morning. We also have one of our career and technical education associates with us, and he's here coming from that computer science background. So we're super excited you joined us today as well. And I love your perspective, thinking about vocabulary and academic conversations. So using some of that tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary, proving your competency with it. So a great connection. Thank you. All right. So that we all have the same kind of like background knowledge or entering point, one thing we like to do before we start our PDs or get too in depth with them is to calibrate with an article or a reading. So on your note catcher in box 2, you'll see 2 articles are linked. We'd like for you to read one of those articles. As you read that article, choose one statement in the article that you find particularly impactful. Then you'll reflect on the statement that you pulled out. Can you make a connection to it? Do you have a question about that quote? Is there something you would challenge in that statement? Or does that statement that you picked out, the quote that you picked out, give you an aha moment? And then you'll explain that thinking on your note catcher. Now, this activity will give you about 5 minutes to do that. So go ahead and open your note catcher. Again, you're going to box number 2 and choosing one of those articles to read and reflect on. All right. Hopefully you had enough time to complete that exercise of consider this. What I'd like now is, as you feel comfortable, I'd love for you to drop some of your thinking or your reflections into the chat, just so we can kind of see what your thinking is around these 2 different articles. But then I'd also love for 2 people to unmute and talk to us. Listening to my voice the whole time can get pretty annoying. So I'd love to hear your voices and hear your thinking around one of these articles.
I read the second article, and it just, especially in the implications for practice, where it had, and it mentioned in the article about kids retelling stories. And I just thought about how simple that would be to incorporate into what you're already doing. Turning and talking to a partner, retelling what we read today. And it could be in any subject. It doesn't have to be in reading. It could be what you were reading in social studies, or part of your self-select your reading routine to spend the last couple minutes turning and talking with a partner and retelling what you read that day.
I love that you saw cross-content connection with that, because that's something that we often get asked. Well, there's not really time for social studies and science. Well, if we're using evidence-based, strong ELA practices in those, how could there not be? That's a great reinforcement tool. So I love that. And retelling aligns with AOR 6.1, which deals with that summarizing and paraphrasing. So, I love that cross-content connection and the cross-strand connection. Okay, one more person.
I can, if that's okay.
Yes.
I read the first article. I think it was the first article, What Kind of Talk? So my connection was that I really think this is where we're asking all that we ask a child to do within the ELA strands. This is kind of where it's all coming together and synthesized for the students. And that it has to be authentic, but at the same time planned. So that was my wondering, was like, how do we keep some conversations which are authentic between the teacher, the students, and the students, which needs to be born out of their wonderings, but also at the same time intentionally planning it. And my aha was that this is, if you are teaching in a high poverty classroom or school, this is where you're filling in all of the background knowledge, getting them to think about their thinking, all of those pieces that are needed, especially in high poverty classrooms. This is where all of that is held.
And what a great way to build background knowledge through those conversations, which is something that's often lacking in high poverty areas. But Amy, you said you wanted to see authentic ways that it can be done, but then also how can it be structured and built in? So one activity we're going to do in section 3 is actually taking a lesson and adding oral communications intentionally to it. So I love that. That's perfect. It makes me excited. Okay, I'm looking through the chat, the nature of exploratory talk, and I'm just reading really quickly. Ooh, I love that, Benjamin. Yes, it gets missed because it's not assessed, but how could help with other schools. I love that. Enjoyed how the article 1 discussed different forms of speaking and support student growth in different ways. Yes. How can we all access in different entry points and still get to the common goal of those oral communications, standards, and indicators? All right, now that we've kind of calibrated our understanding and got ourselves thinking pretty deeply, now let's try to apply oral communications as a whole to 2 other pieces that we're probably pretty familiar with. So something that you're probably pretty familiar with are the overarching expectations. These are found in our standards document and are expectations at every grade level. These overarching expectations include things that what we determine or what we call the business of how we do ELA. What an ELA classroom should include every day, day to day. And then we see the profile of the South Carolina graduate. Now, I know we all have these hanging on the walls in our classrooms, right? And we've probably studied them for several years now. But what I want us to do is I want us to take a look at these two pieces of information, the profile and the overarching expectations. And I want you to think about, where do these two documents overlap with oral communications? Which oral communication skills could be considered transferable for students outside of the ELA classroom? So if we expect oral communications to be in the overarching expectations and in the profile of a South Carolina graduate, where do we see those outside the ELA classroom? And I think one of y'all already kind of brought that up and shared that. On box 3 of your note catcher, we want to give you just a minute to reflect on that. So we'll take 2 minutes and reflect on the transferable skills of oral communications through the lens of the profile and the overarching expectations. Okay, let's talk through some of those transferable skills. When we compare oral communications to the overarching expectations, some things that we notice are that this is going to click in differently, but that's okay. So when we think about the transferable skills with oral communications and the profile of the South Carolina graduate, one thing that we notice is that students should express ideas clearly and persuasively. They should engage in academic discourse, debate, discussion, and listen actively and respond thoughtfully to diverse perspectives. Also, adapt communication to different audiences and purposes. So we see a lot of overlap there with our profile of the South Carolina graduate. Now, let's take a look at the overlap with the overarching expectations. With our overarching expectations, we see them engaging in academic discussions, the ability to defend their ideas and articulate their ideas using textual evidence. We also see the skills of argument and persuasion. Practicing those rhetorical appeals verbally strengthens their writing skills. We see collaborative learning, where they're engaging in peer discussions, fostering analytical thinking, and preparing students for professional teamwork. And then finally, the adaptation to various contexts. They can adjust their speaking and their presentations to meet whatever audience they are presenting to. That's an essential skill for careers as well. So then when we generalize that information and think about the transferable skills that are brought out through the overarching expectations and the profile of the South Carolina graduate, we see that we expect students to be able to to come away from their K through 12 education with those public speaking and presentation skills, that they have confidence in active listening and questioning, that they are able to negotiate and have the power of persuasion through the conversations that they've had in their K through 12 career. They will also have some confidence in interview and professional communication by being able to adapt their conversations to different audiences. They'll have some experience with digital communication and being able to produce oral communication that aligns to, or that they may have oral communication and use it in conjunction with digital presentations or digital communication. So looking at all of that third column, those transferable skills, thinking about the oral communication expectations and the overarching expectations and the profile of the South Carolina graduate, look at all we're able to produce in our students to be workforce ready. That makes me excited because that's such a huge goal for us in South Carolina, that students are able to enter the next phase of their life prepared. And we have such an integral part of that in the K through 5 realm. So let's take a closer look at what that looks like. So we know that we have 4 strands in our ELA standards. Those strands are foundations of literacy, applications of reading, research, and then written and oral communications. Written and oral communications includes 9 standards. Now, we have had extensive training on those first 5 standards within written and oral communications, and all of that information is housed on our professional learning library. So if you're interested in any professional learning around argumentative, informative, or narrative writing, grammar and conventions, or improving writing, we have webinars available for you to support that instruction. Our last webinar of this spring series will focus on handwriting, that number 6 standard for written and oral communications. But the standards that we're focusing on today deal with communicating ideas, collaboration and perspective, and evaluating ideas. That's C7, C8, and C9. So let's take a look here at what our glossary defines those 3 standards as. So C7 would be organizing and communicating ideas through a range of formats to engage a variety of audiences. C8 would be through collaboration, react and respond to information while building upon the ideas of others and respecting diverse perspectives. And then C9 would be evaluating ideas, evaluating and critiquing the ideas and concepts interactively through listening and speaking. Now, let's think about our classrooms or the classrooms that we support. When I was a first grade teacher, I taught first grade, kindergarten, second grade, and third grade for 15 years. One thing that I felt really confident in was communicating ideas. We did lots of projects and experiences throughout the school year where students were having to communicate their findings or communicate their ideas to others. However, a place where I feel if I could go back and redo everything, I would lean into the evaluating ideas standard. That's not a place where I feel that I adequately prepare my students, and something that I feel like I could improve upon in my instruction. When we see the words I have and I need at the bottom of our slide here, what I'd like for you to do in box 4 is to record your own analysis in your classroom or in the classrooms that you support most often. What do you see as something that you have in your building? You feel confident that you're doing a good job of that. You feel like you have a good handle on the expectations around that standard. And then for the I need, write down which of these you need more resources or instructional support or explanation around. I have and I need. Go ahead and record that on your note catcher. And as you feel comfortable, drop those in the chat as well. We'd love to see your thinking. Again, as you feel comfortable, drop into the chat which of these you feel like you have a good handle on and which of these you feel like you may need some more support with, or you'd just like to have more resources for. Evaluating ideas. Jessica, yes, I agree with you. And that is one that I had to get some support on. I had to reach out to some of my colleagues and say, hey, how do you do this? Especially in the early childhood classroom, right, Lindsay? Oh, it's interesting to hear them evaluate the ideas of others. How can we support teachers in that? Well, we have a resource coming to you in just a few minutes that will support that, I hope, and you'll feel confident to walk away saying, hey, I have an idea of how that might look in the classroom. All right. Now let's take a look at another piece of our ELA standards document that you are probably pretty familiar with, our grade level entrance statements. So we have explored the grade level entrance statements for quite some time now, and we've read them for a variety of purposes. But today, what we'd like for you to do is, Casey dropped in the chat the link to all of our grade level entrance statements. We'd like for you to read one of the grade level entrance statements, whichever one you choose, with a different lens. So again, choose any of those grade level entrance statements, but we want you to read it through a different lens today. And we're going to do a protocol we call the virtual turn and talk with this. In the chat, I'd love for you to respond to this prompt. How could the expectations for oral communications enhance the reading and writing at your grade level? So read that grade level entrance statement and then respond in this lens. How could the expectations for oral communications enhance reading and writing at your grade level? I like you already kind of starting the second part of our protocol. So for everyone in who has dropped your response in the chat, what I'd like for you to do now is to go back through the answers that are populating in the chat list, and I want you to react to one of those posts or reply to one of those posts. Especially if you read the same grade level entering statement, what could you add to or connect to in what was shared? So go ahead and do the second part of our turn and talk protocol. React or respond a reply to someone in the chat. I love reading all of the synthesis and connections that you are making in the chat. I see a lot of you comparing what your partner or another person in the chat is writing to what you read in the articles or what we've already talked through about the standards expectations. That's really heavy mind work, so I'm impressed with that. Another aha I had while we've gone through this section of our presentation is that responding to others and reflecting on the ideas of others takes time. It's not something that we can just ask for and have it done in the chat immediately, right? It took you a minute to go back, think about what that person said, and then respond to them appropriately. How often have you seen in the early childhood or elementary classroom where students talk at each other, but they aren't collaborating and talking to each other? My favorite book is, and they're not listening to what each other are saying. They're talking over at each other or at each other. But when we talk about collaborating, that's a conversation and building upon the ideas of others, which is something that you are all doing just now. So what I want to draw your attention to is the activity we just engaged in, that virtual turn and talk. Could easily be replicated in person, right? We do turn and talks in our early childhood and elementary classrooms all the time. And that strategy aligns to ELA C.8, that collaboration, the react and respond in the standard. So a great strategy that I'm sure a lot of you are already using and a good way to connect to that activity. Oh, Casey, I love your comment. Yes, there's a difference between listening to respond and listening to understand. Oh, and we build the foundation for that in elementary school. Okay. Now, this is the end of section 1. What I'd like for you to do now is on your note catcher in box number 5, respond and let me know what in your thinking was challenged by information that you heard in this section. Did any of your thinking change as a result of information presented during this section? Or was this just a great time to confirm the practice already taking place in your classroom? Go ahead and respond to that. Anything that was challenged, changed, or confirmed for you. You can respond on your note catcher or in the chat, whatever you feel comfortable with. Ben, that is so funny. We were in a professional learning class this past semester, and so many of our responses in the posts were talking at each other. Yeah. Adult learners have that problem too. Challenged, changed, or confirmed? Go ahead and respond to that in the chat. And for time's sake, we are going to keep it moving. Now let's take a look at exploring the expectations of the actual indicators. As we go through this section, I want you to pay attention to box number 6 on your note catcher. We are going to be doing something called the CER evaluation. For CER evaluation, in box 6 of your note catcher, I want you to take notes as I'm presenting this information to you. What claim am I arguing throughout this next section? For E, I want you to write down what information or evidence am I using to prove my claim. And then for reasoning, I want you to tell me how am I explaining, justifying, or reasoning my claim. So just over the next about 15 minutes, as I'm presenting this next section, I want to focus your attention on that. My claim, what evidence am I using, and how am I reasoning that to you all? Try to capture notes around that in your note catcher. We'll come back to this at the end of section 2. Now it's time to actually look at the indicator expectations. This to me is the most important part. So if you are familiar with our presentations, we often draw your attention to the vertical progression. Now this is found in Appendix B of your standards document. The vertical progression provides that kindergarten through English 4 progression of each standard and indicator. In that section, also, new content or skills are in bold so that you know what is new for that grade level. So most of you are probably pretty familiar with the vertical progression, but we just want to calibrate everyone's understanding to the document that we'll be using in this next section. So for this next section, we're going to use box 7 of your note catcher. In just a minute, we are going to break down the needs or 4 sections of a grade level indicator. The first section of the grade level indicator that we want to look at are needs. In a minute, you're going to take a look at one indicator for oral communications. We want you to think about what would a student need to enter my grade and be successful with this indicator? What skills or content do they need to be familiar with when they enter my grade in order to be successful? Then we're going to have you look at that indicator through the lens of guarantees. What skills or contents will the student at your grade level leave with when they leave you? What can you ensure that you give them in instruction around that indicator? The next lens we want you to consider the indicator through are key terms. What are key terms or vocabulary that you need to know that your students are familiar with, but that you are also calibrated with? And are any of those terms defined in our glossary so that we all have a working common definition that's aligned to the expectations of our standards and indicators? And then finally, we want you to view that indicator through the lens of what impact on planning or instruction will it have. So think about what's important about this indicator for teachers to know. What could student success look like with this indicator? And then how might teachers need to plan to support that indicator through formative assessment or even through like gathering the right instructional materials? Now, before we send you off to do this yourselves, I want to show you how I did this. So let's take a look at a 4th grade example. So I'm looking at, I'm going to go ahead and pop everything up, C9.1 for 4th grade. Okay, that's that evaluating the ideas of others. So when students come to me, what they need to, and the indicator at that level says, identify and explain a speaker's claims and supporting reasons and evidence. So when a student enters my 4th grade classroom, they need to be able to identify a speaker's claim and identify a reason for the claim. Now, where I can kind of figure out what I can expect from them is by looking at the 3rd grade indicator. So in 3rd grade, they are identifying a speaker's claim and they are identifying a reason for the claim. Now for fourth grade, what I will ensure my students leave with, what I can guarantee they exit my classroom with, is that they can identify and explain a speaker's claim, and they can identify and explain a speaker's reasons and evidence. Now, that's a jump from the need that they entered with to the guarantee they leave with. When I think about the key terms that the students in fourth grade need to be familiar with and that I need to have a definition for, it would be claim, reasons, and evidence, all of which are defined in our glossary. And then when I think about the impacts that this would have on planning and instruction, well, the first thing I need to consider is that I have to have resources to give my students. So like speeches or videos that contain claims, reasons, and evidence. But then I also need to consider how am I going to, I need to consider how this indicator might align with or might be bundled with other indicators that I'm already teaching. So for this C 9.1, it reminds me a lot of C 1.1. And what kind of writing is that? Argumentative, yes. So when we see that connection, I can also think about, well, how could I build in C 9.1 oral communications to C 1.1 written communications? How could those live together? So this is just an example of how I would do this for fourth grade C 9.1. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a few minutes to try this on. Try this activity out. In box 7 of your note catcher, you have listed the vertical articulations, C7, C8, and C9. You also have that 4 square box for needs, guarantees, key terms, and impacts on planning and instruction. What we'd like for you to do is go to your breakout room, and in that breakout room, pick one grade level indicator. Okay, so the breakout rooms will either be like C7 group 1, C7 group 2, C8 group 1, C8 group, and so on. You get to choose the grade level when you get in your room, and then you all complete the grade level breakdown together. We would like you to be prepared for one person to share when you come back from those breakout rooms. Any questions before we get sent out? We know where to access the vertical articulation, and we know how to select our grade level. Awesome. All right, Brenna, go ahead and open those breakout rooms. You'll have about 6 minutes for this activity.
Will contribute to the meaning of print or non-print text.
Got it.
Welcome, welcome, welcome back. I hope that you were able to get through a lot of that process, even if you weren't able to finish that process. But I want to talk about the process in general. So when we share our feedback, I would like for every one person from every group to kind of share your findings. But here's what I want you to share. Share with me how this activity supported your understanding of the oral communications indicators. How did this activity support your understanding of the oral communications indicators? So someone that explored C7, go ahead and unmute and share for me. How did this activity support your understanding of the indicator?
I can share.
Thank you.
And it's a hat day at our school. Please excuse my hat.
It's hat day at my son's school too. Yeah.
Oh, good. I just noticed that I really had to be more specific and dig deep into what the previous grade level needed to teach. So then that helped me to have a better understanding of where I could have a starting place with the work I needed to do with those students and the grade level I was focusing on. And then I think the glossary is a fantastic document that I need to dig into more and remember that it's there. And then it was also really helpful to kind of see areas where I could relate that standard of C7 to other communication standards. So I thought that was really helpful overall.
Awesome, Jenny. Okay, so many things that you said just like gave my heart flutters. Glossary, amen, right? I feel like that needs to be something we tote around as ELA teachers so that I'm calibrated in my language, and that my language matches the language of the standards and indicators, right? Doesn't and I think that gives us a good lens for how to enter our instructional materials or any other teacher created resource. Like, does it align to the language of the indicators? Cool. And then another thing you said, Jenna, so often feedback we get from coaches is that I went in this classroom and they're still teaching blank blank. And that was covered in first grade. And this was a fourth grade classroom. How do we remedy that? It's by looking at what we need them to enter with, knowing that grade before us indicator, and we expect that from our students. So Jenna, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That also frees up some instructional time for us, right? I'm not still teaching you what a claim is. You know what a claim is, right? You've identified a claim already. So in fourth grade, we're identifying and explaining claims. Love that. So good. Thank you, Jenna. All right. Somebody explain to me how this supported your understanding or your thinking around C.8.
I was in one of the C.8 rooms.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, share with me about this process. How did it support your understanding of the indicator?
We looked at the grade, third grade. So then the first thing we did, we took a step back and looked at second grade. Like you were saying, to see what they were coming to third grade with.
Yes. Okay.
And we just, some of those key words that really stood out was they really got specific, especially in second grade. It was more specific in second grade about how they entered the conversation. Like they specifically mentioned greeting, taking turns, responding to other statements, restating what others said during conversation. So, and then in third grade, there's kind of a shift where it just says listen actively, and it doesn't really state what that means because they've only learned that in second grade, I guess, and consider and reflecting upon others' ideas.
Jennifer, I love you mentioned that because that third grade indicator is definitely more rigorous, but it's also less explicit. So if I want to know what that means, I have to look at second grade to know, well, what do they mean about actively participating in the conversation? That is articulated in the previous grade's indicator. And I don't know that if I'm not looking at it vertically. So that's really helpful, especially for that indicator. All right. C9, somebody talk to me about how C9 or how the exploration of C9 with this grade level breakdown strategy helped you.
I can talk. So we talked through C9 and it's about, excuse me, identifying a speaker's claim and at least one supporting reason. And we talked about needing the background knowledge beforehand. We looked at third grade, We looked at third grade.
Okay.
And in second grade, they were supposed to be figuring out what an opinion is and identifying an opinion and at least one supporting reason. So understanding the difference between a claim and an opinion was an important piece of information that they needed to study and explore. Right. Yeah. Right off the bat, trying to understand that. And then being able to understand what supporting reasons are, which they've started a few years before, but now being able to put that into application. So starting in kindergarten, they were just asking and answering questions. And then that was growing into listening and asking and answering questions. And then by first grade, they started talking about opinions. And now we're looking at claims versus opinions and the supporting reasons that go along with them.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you miss one step in that vertical progression, then you've got students who are not going to be on target for your grade level. So I love that you bring that up, that calibration of that vocabulary and language and the expectation of what they enter with. How can I build off opinion in third grade to build that understanding about claim? That's a big one. So C9 is always the most daunting to me. Y'all had the challenge group. All right. Hopefully you see the relevance of this activity. And if you're a coach or a grade level chair, you see how maybe you could replicate this with the teachers that you teach with or the teachers that you support. This is a great way to ensure calibration of like, what exactly does my indicator expect of me? And then what should I expect from the grade levels before me? So just a great little activity to really understand the expectations of those indicators. Now, just to summarize, here are some of our findings about C7. So when we look at C7, it includes those components of oral communication skills, those things that you typically think about with oral communications. And then second grade introduces digital tools. So when we think about our second grade teachers, this is a great place to lean into when students are presenting, how can they integrate some of those digital tools and media. All right, now when we look at C.8, this is the standard that focuses on conversation and collaboration skills. Again, once we move up into 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, it becomes less explicit in indicator language what those expectations are. So when we think about C8, we want to think of that, take a look at the kindergarten through 5th grade expectations, especially if you're upper grades, because you want to know what you should be expecting of your students as far as conversation and collaboration. One thing that I heard you mention earlier in the chat, guys, was that students must be able to speak and listen to respond. It's just not that turn taking, but then the listening to respond to what they say. And that falls under that collaboration aspect of that C.8 standard. Now for C9, the expectations, we have an emphasis on identifying speakers' first topic in kindergarten. Then we move to their opinion in 1st and 2nd grade. In 3rd grade, we introduce identifying a speaker's claim. Then we go into reasons, evidence, and with varying levels of rigor and difficulty. So C9 often makes us think of another indicator and standard that we have in our standards document. And it reminds me of our argument writing indicator. All right, so now let's take a look at box 8 of your note catcher. And we're going to compare 2 different indicators. So take a look at box 8, and in that box, you'll see the vertical articulation for C1 and C7. For just a minute, I want you to open those up and I want you to compare those two. How do you see these 2 standards connect or support one another? As you read those, yes, Casey can drop that again. As you review those, you may notice similarities between the expectations for writing arguments and presenting ideas. So I'll let you have just a minute to pull up the vertical articulation of C1 and the vertical articulation of C7 and compare those. Go ahead and drop into the chat. What connections do you see between these 2 indicators? Are there any connections between the content in each of them, or any connections between the skills expected in each of those? So one question that we often receive is, these 2 indicators look really similar. Why is that? Well, it's intentional. Those indicators are expected to be taught in tandem. They're oftentimes bundled in instruction. You can teach C1 alongside C7, and there's several instances of that across our standards document. But as we've kind of read and discussed throughout this section 2 today, oral communications can be a way to support reading and writing. We're going to take a closer look at that in section 3 that we're about to enter, but hopefully you've seen connections throughout what we've presented to you of how oral communications can support all parts of your ELA classroom. All right, now we're going to move back to that CER evaluation. If you'll remember at the beginning of section 2, I asked you to take some notes and record your thinking around the claims, evidence, and reasoning that I presented throughout this section. Hopefully you have some notes on maybe what I was trying to argue in this section, what information I used to prove my claim, and then how I explained or justified or reasoned my claim to you. What I would like you to do now is to drop into the chat any of these aspects of my section 2. Drop in the chat my claim. What claim did I make throughout my presentation to you of section 2? Drop into the chat any evidence or information I shared with you that helped to prove my claim. And then I want you to drop in any reasoning. How did I explain, justify, or reason my claim to you in section 2? Go ahead and drop those in the chat. Angie and Sarah, yes, I would argue that both of those were claims that I made in this section. That oral communication supports reading and writing, but that also that the vertical articulation is essential for understanding all the standards, but especially oral communications. Yeah, very good. They're important to know what you teach at your grade level, Jennifer. Yes. So this is an activity that you could also do with your students. Some of your maybe 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students, you could do this CER evaluation. You present material to them orally, or you have them watch a video or hear another classmate present information orally, and then they do their own CER evaluation of that orally presented material. This aligns to C.9, evaluating and critiquing the ideas of others. All right. Now let's move into section 3. Now this is my favorite part because this is where we get into the instructional practices and the resources for you. So we know we've shared this slide so many times about the alignment of instruction, but we want to reinforce this point. The alignment of instruction is important because we must start instruction with our grade level indicators. That's why we took such a long time this morning to do that grade level breakdown and understanding of what my indicator expects of me. So the grade level indicators are where all materials, resources, and instruction begins. Then we actually move to that instruction and building our instruction off of our foundational understanding of our grade level indicators. From that, we move to formative assessment, where we give students a chance to try on some of that instruction and do it themselves. Now, because it's formative, it informs that instruction again. And so we go back into that cycle of what do I need to reteach, reinforce, or how can I support my students in their next step? So we also want you to consider the lens of instruction. And we're going to explore 2 of those lenses this morning. First is the generative and evaluative experiences. In our classrooms, we want students to have opportunities with both of these, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But then the other lens of instruction is that we expect students to have opportunities for micro, mini, and macro experiences with standards and indicators. So let's talk a little bit more about what that looks like. Generative versus evaluative experiences. So generative experiences are those where students are applying the learning and producing a product. Okay, those might look in oral communications like creating a presentation or participating in a class discussion. Those are generative experiences for your students. But students also need the alternative of that, and that is the evaluative experiences. That's where students are serving as the expert and they're reviewing the work of others, giving feedback, offering revisions or edits. Or maybe they're editing their own work, but they are the evaluator in that experience. So examples of that for oral communication may be that they watch a video and they review it, kind of doing that CER evaluation. Or they're providing feedback to a speaker. Maybe a speaker has done a speech and they are reviewing how they held eye contact or how they engaged their audience. So these are just 2 different ways that we want you to view oral communications instruction and experiences in your classroom. Now, when we think about C7 lives more in that generative experience lane. Students are producing work for C7. When we think about C9, it falls more on that evaluative side, where students are giving feedback or evaluating the speeches or oral communication of others. However, C.8, that collaboration and communication, lives right in the middle. Some of it has to be generative because they have to produce what they're going to say in the conversation or collaboration. But part of it is evaluative because they have to evaluate, what did you say to me and how can I respond to that? So it's always interesting to see how our standards and indicators fall within these generative and evaluative experiences. And oral communications provides us an opportunity for both of these experiences. Now, let's talk a little bit about micro, mini, and macro experiences. Now, we know in classroom instruction that we want to give students multiple opportunities to demonstrate their proficiency with their grade level indicator, right? And we do those sometimes through micro experiences, where it's an experience that is less than one class period long. We may also give them mini experiences. Those would be experiences that last 1 to 2 class periods. And then obviously we have those culminating experiences, which are our macro experiences. Now, the importance of this is that we provide students multiple opportunities to demonstrate proficiency with an indicator through micro, mini, and macro experiences. And we have some that we would love to provide you this morning. So in just a second, you're going to look at box 9 of your note catcher. There you're going to see a folder. In that folder are 3 subfolders, a C7, a C8, and a C9 subfolder. Now, in that folder, you're going to find a micro, mini, and macro activity for each of these indicators. So what we have gone through and done, we have provided to you a couple examples of what this could look like in a micro, mini, macro experience for C7, C8, and C9. Now, these are not meant to be the exemplars. These are just examples of how we could see these indicators being taught in elementary classrooms. So as you enter this folder, I want you to think about your I have and I need that you mentioned earlier. A lot of you mentioned that you needed more support with C9 for instruction. If that's you, I would lean into that C9 folder and explore the experience suggestions that we have in that folder. However, maybe you feel really confident with the I have of communicating ideas, but you're tired of doing the same thing over and over for the past few years. You want to explore some new ones. And that's where I would lean into that C7 folder and look and see, well, what are some different ways of presenting information? Or maybe you want to look at different ways for students in your school or your classroom to collaborate and understand the perspectives of others. In that case, you'd explore that C8 folder. We're going to give you just a few minutes to explore that folder and see if there's anything that resonates with you. So let's take about the next 6 minutes and explore that folder. Awesome, awesome. I'm glad that you're finding some of these micro, mini, and macro oral communication experiences helpful for you in your classroom. You're going to find them extra helpful in this next part in collaboration time that we're going to have. So for our next activity, we're going to move to box 10 of your note catcher. There you'll see different grade level standards listed. I'm sorry, you'll see different grade levels listed. These are grade level lesson plans from a variety of instructional materials that we have in our state. So we went directly to those high quality instructional materials and we pulled a lesson for every grade level. Then we read the lesson and listed the indicator that it is aligned to, and that would be the reading or writing indicator. After that, we've given you some space to reflect on how you could support this lesson with oral communications. Now, here's the activity that we're going to expect you to do. In just a minute, you're going to move to breakout rooms. We want you to review the provided sample lesson. So whatever breakout room you go to, you may be in the 1st grade room, the 5th grade room. It'll say it at the top of your breakout room screen. We want you to review that lesson. The first step we want you to do is to look at that lesson's alignment to the indicator listed. Evaluate, is this really aligned to this grade level indicator? Or is there a little misalignment that we need to pay attention to as we go to teach that lesson? But then here's the fun part, okay? The fun part is that we want you to, as you read that lesson, lean into which oral communication indicator you could add to that lesson to enhance it. It could be generative or evaluative. It could be a micro, mini, or macro. We want you to see how you could add oral communications to the lesson provided. You might even want to choose one of the micro, mini, and macro activities to add to that lesson to make it better or to make it more effective. It may mean that you have to tweak the micro, mini, and macro activity, but we'd love to see how you can apply that to the lesson from the instructional material. Now, there may already be an oral communication component to that lesson, but we want to see how you can improve upon that for us. So, welcome back. Welcome back. So great to have you back with me. I always get nervous as the facilitator that when I send people to breakout rooms, they'll leave and be like, I'm not doing that. Thank y'all for engaging in the breakout rooms. It really just, it makes me so happy and it excites me that you are wanting to try on this work and dig into these practices. So I appreciate you sticking with us this morning. All right. Now I want to hear some of your ideas. I'd love for at least 3 groups to share. So we had 6 grade levels. That's just half of you. So between kindergarten and first grade, which of y'all would like to share and tell me a little bit about your lesson and then how you added oral communications to it? Again, you're just going to share a little bit about your lesson and then how you added oral communications.
So we had kindergarten, and the indicator was to discuss character and setting, but also how the characters and setting moved the plot forward. We noticed that there was not a lot of support in the lesson in plot, in the plot moving. So we discussed that needed to be changed. We also saw that there was no inferencing in the lesson. So I think that we talked about possibly discussing the sequence of the events and getting more into the discussion of how these affected the plot. And inferencing, students need to understand what inferencing is. I feel like that needs to be modeled repeatedly. That type of concept for a kindergartner is really tough because, a lot of inferencing comes from real world experiences. So definitely having more conversation about that would be needed in the lesson, because the lesson did say that it spoke, there was conversations about plot and characters, but it was very surface level.
And Amber, I love that you mentioned that about inference because that's why we pulled it out as an overarching expectation. The Standards Writing Committee felt so strongly that inference was a part of all lessons in the ELA classroom that it is something that it's just our business of how we do ELA. We infer all the time, and it should be a common modeling practice for students. What about adding oral communications or supporting oral communications in this lesson?
Let me see if we got to that. I know I was about to say something in my group and I was being switched back. So we kind of ran out of time.
That's okay.
I don't know if somebody from my group wants to chime in, but I don't have that on my sheet. I was on that last box when we came back in.
That's okay. That's totally okay. Okay. For the sake of time, we'll go to 2nd or 3rd grade. 2nd or 3rd, one of y'all share? Brenna, will you share what third grade discussed?
Sure. So in their conversation, they were talking about students being able to participate in literary discussions. And one of the strategies that they found was the 1-minute rack, which is exactly like the virtual turn and talk that we adapted for webinar purposes, but in-person purposes. RAC stands for Respond, Add, Connect. You'd partner students up, and partner A would have 30 seconds to respond to a teacher-provided prompt or student-provided, but a prompt. And then partner B would have 30 seconds to either add or connect to partner A's response. So they thought this would be a really good structured way to kind of ease students into literary discussions.
Thank you, Brenna. All right, 4th and 5th grade. Would anyone like to share from 4th or 5th grade? What did you learn from this?
So I was in the 4th grade group. We had our lesson was about the age of the Vikings, and students were supposed to identify and explain the central idea and how it's developed by key details. And then they were also supposed to explain how basic text features contribute to meaning in the text. And we thought that that was in the lesson, but we felt like it could be kind of developed further. And then we included oral communication. We thought a good strategy would be to use the I think it was the collaborative circles. Yeah, the collaborative circle or collaborative conversation circles. That one, we thought that one would be good, just to help bring that conversation further and kind of take things a little bit further past the surface level conversations to really kind of get into, especially the discussing the key main idea and key details, and how the text features contribute to meaning. So that was kind of what we were thinking.
Thank you, Amber. I'm so glad you brought that micro, mini, and macro back to the conversation again, because it is a scaffold to that Socratic seminar that we see in maybe late middle school to high school. So we can practice and build some of that structure of conversation for our students in elementary school with those collaborative conversation circles. So love that. Awesome. I'm so glad you found that helpful. All right. And hopefully you enjoyed this experience. So you just participated in C7 as you communicated your ideas and your findings to a variety of audiences, to us. So we appreciate you engaging in that sharing of your revision and addition to those lessons. Share this. All right. Give me a thumbs up if you can see it. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So for our clarity and closure today, we are going to do our compass reflection. And the compass reflection is, it stands for north, south, east, and west. In the north would be our next steps. So as a result of our presentation today, and especially the section 3, what would be your next step to support oral communications in your classroom? For E, for east, excited about. What are you excited about from our presentation today? Is there anything you're excited to try or excited to share? For South, our S, what are you saving for later? Maybe this is something that you're in the middle of finishing up report cards or grades, or the 100th day of school, or whatever it is that's going on at your elementary school. And you can't attend to some of this right now, but something you want to save for later to explore. And then for West, our W, what are you still wondering about oral communications as a result of our discussions today? I'll give you a second to record some of that in your note catcher or in the chat. I will encourage you, if you have some wonderings still about oral communications, when we get to our feedback survey, please include those in the feedback survey so that we can reach out and support you with any of those questions or answers at the conclusion of our webinar today. So go ahead and drop some of those in the chat. What are your compass reflections? Your next steps, What are you excited about? What are you still wondering? Or what are you going to save for later to explore? Jenna, I know, I'm so glad you're excited to share this out. That's awesome. Yes. Any way we can support that. We'll share our slide deck and all of our resources with you so that make your job of getting this information to others easier. As you continue to share in the chat your news, your next steps, excited about, save for later, or wonderings, we're going to move on and we're going to reflect on today's purpose. Our purpose today was to understand the content and rigor of those oral communications standards and indicators for our elementary students, but then we also wanted to provide you some standards-based instructional strategies that you could use in your classroom to support oral communications. So how did we do with meeting our purpose today? Do you feel like we met our purpose? Do you feel like you understand the standards better? And do you feel like you have some strategies to teach oral communications moving forward? Hopefully you do. Through your feedback in the chat so far, I see that you have some exciting next steps to take. So I feel we've met our purpose today. And that brings us to the end of our webinar.